When my son moved me out of the house, I built with my own two hands and into the tiny pool house out back. He thought he was putting me in my place. He never once asked whose name was actually on the deed to that $8 million estate. And thank God he never asked. Because 3 weeks later, when a lawyer knocked on his door, that one document turned his greatest achievement into the biggest mistake of his life. But before I tell you exactly how I let my own son build his empire, on land he never owned, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button if you believe the people who mistake a quiet man for a weak one always get exactly what they deserve. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 62 years old, and for 40 years, I built houses with these hands. I never wore a suit to work a single day in my life. I wore steel-toed boots and a tool belt that left a permanent mark on my hips. I started as a framing carpenter at 19, sweeping sawdust and hauling lumber, and by the time I was 40, I owned Hayes Custom Homes, the company that built half the finest houses in our county. Not tract homes, not cookie-cutter boxes. I built the kind of houses that made people stop their cars in the road just to look. Every joint, every beam, every staircase. I could tell you the grain of the wood by memory. The house at the center of this story was the last one I ever built, and the best. 11,000 square feet on 4 acres, with a pool, a guest wing, and a separate little pool house tucked behind the garden. I designed it. I broke ground on it. I laid the cornerstone myself on a cold morning in March, with my wife Margaret standing beside me holding 2 cups of coffee. We built it as our forever home, the place we'd grow old in, the place where our grandchildren would run through the halls. Margaret didn't get to grow old in it. She passed 2 years ago, quietly, in the master bedroom she'd picked the paint colors for. And after she was gone, the house felt like a cathedral built for a congregation that had left, too big, too silent. So when my son Daniel came to me, 6 months after the funeral, and suggested that he and his wife move in, to keep me company, Dad, to help out, I let them. I want to be honest with you about Daniel, because this story doesn't make sense unless you understand what he used to be. He wasn't always cold. As a boy, he'd sit on an overturned bucket at my job sites for hours, handing me nails, asking 1,000 questions. I taught him to swing a hammer before he could ride a bike. I paid his way through business school by working weekends I'll never get back. I was proud of him, proud in that quiet, aching way a working man is proud when his son gets to wear clean clothes to the office. But somewhere along the way, Daniel decided that where he came from was something to be ashamed of. He started correcting the way I spoke in front of his colleagues. He stopped mentioning that his father built houses. He'd say I was in real estate, which sounded cleaner. And when he married Vanessa, a sharp, glittering woman who measured every person she met by the watch on their wrist, the last soft parts of my son seemed to harden over completely. Vanessa looked at me the way you'd look at old furniture that came with a house you'd just bought, something to be tolerated and eventually replaced. The first time she visited, she walked through the home I'd built beam by beam and said, to Daniel, not to me, "It has good bones. It just needs someone with vision to bring it into this decade." Good bones. I'd poured those bones myself. But I only smiled and poured her a coffee and said nothing. Because I've learned something in 62 years that people like Vanessa never learn until it's far too late. The quietest man in the room is usually the one who knows exactly where every wall is load-bearing, and exactly which one to pull when the whole thing needs to come down. I just didn't know yet how soon I'd have to pull it. For the first few months, it almost felt like a family again. Daniel and Vanessa took the master wing on the east side of the house. I kept my old study and the bedroom Margaret and I had shared on the west side. The place was so big we could go a full day without crossing paths, and at first, that suited everyone. I'd make my coffee at dawn, walk the garden, check the joints of the pergola I'd built, run my hand along the railings I'd sanded smooth a decade ago. This house was my life's work, and living inside it was like living inside a memory of my wife. But a house that big has a way of revealing people, and slowly, week by week, Vanessa began to redraw the borders. It started small, the way these things always do. She replaced the furniture in the living room, the leather chairs Margaret and I had bought on our 30th anniversary, and had them carried out to the curb without asking me. When I came home from the hardware store, they were just gone. They didn't fit the aesthetic, she said, not looking up from her phone. I'm having the whole downstairs reimagined. Then it was the photographs. The wall along the main staircase had held 40 years of our family. Margaret pregnant, Daniel's first day of school, the three of us at the lake. One afternoon I came in and the wall was bare, painted a flat museum gray, and the photos were in a cardboard box in the garage. We're going for a cleaner, more elevated look, Vanessa explained. Personal photos read a little cluttered. I took that box up to my room and I didn't say a word, but I noticed. A man who spent his life building things notices when the structure around him is quietly being demolished, one wall at a time. Daniel saw all of it. That's the part that cut the deepest. He'd watch his wife erase his own mother from the walls of the house his father built, and he'd say nothing. He'd just glance at me with a look that begged me not to make it difficult. The look of a man who had chosen his side and needed everyone to pretend there hadn't been sides to choose. The thing that finally told me where I really stood came about 4 months in, over something almost too small to mention. I was in the kitchen making myself a sandwich, my own kitchen, in my own house, when Vanessa came in with 2 of her friends, women dressed for lunch at a place with valet parking. She stopped, looked at me standing there at the counter in my flannel shirt, and I watched her face do a small, quick calculation. "Oh, Walter," she said, with a bright, apologetic little laugh. "Daniel's father. He helped us out with the down payment. He's staying with us for a while." She steered her friends toward the patio. "He keeps to himself, mostly. Bless him. He helped us out with the down payment. Staying with us." In the house I designed, financed, and built with my own hands, I had just been introduced to strangers, as a charity case my son had taken in. I finished my sandwich. I washed my plate. And I said nothing. Understand, I could have corrected her right there. I could have laid out the truth in front of her manicured friends and watched her face fall. But I've learned that correcting people like Vanessa in the moment only teaches them to be more careful, never more decent. It gives them a chance to explain, to reframe, to make you the one who caused a scene. So I did what I've always done. I stayed quiet, and I started paying very close attention. And the more attention I paid, the more I began to understand that something larger was moving underneath all these small humiliations. Vanessa didn't rearrange furniture and strip photos off walls because she cared about aesthetic. She did it because a person can't fully take possession of something while it still bears the fingerprints of someone else. She was preparing the house, clearing it, making it hers. The only fingerprints left to remove were mine. I found out just how far she was willing to go on an ordinary Tuesday in the fall, when I overheard a phone call she never meant for me to hear, a call about a facility, a deed, and a plan that had a very specific place in it reserved for me. And it was nowhere inside the house I'd built. It was a gray Tuesday afternoon, and I'd come inside to find my reading glasses. The house was quiet. Daniel was at the office, and I thought Vanessa was out. I was halfway down the hall toward my study when I heard her voice drifting from the sunroom, low and clipped, the way people talk when they don't want to be overheard. I stopped. I'm not proud of standing there in the hallway, pressed against the wall like a thief in my own home. But something in her tone froze me in place. It wasn't the bright, performing voice she used for her friends. It was flat, businesslike, the voice of someone doing arithmetic. "No, he's no trouble," she was saying. "He putters around. He does his little garden. That's not the issue. The issue is the timeline." A pause. The whole property's in his name, every square foot. So until we deal with that, we can't touch the equity, we can't refinance, we can't do anything. I stood very still. Right, exactly, she went on. So here's what we're thinking. There's a place out past the county line, assisted living, memory care, that kind of thing. Very reasonable. We move him there, we get power of attorney signed over, and then transferring the deed is just paperwork. Once it's in our names, we can leverage it however we want. A soft laugh. Honestly, at his age, half the time he can't find his own glasses. Nobody's going to question that he needs care. Nobody's going to question it. She was building a story about me, a frail, forgetful old man who couldn't be trusted with his own affairs. And she was building it the same way I'd once built houses. Carefully. Load-bearing wall by load-bearing wall. Daniel's on board, she said. He knows it's the smart move. He just needs a little managing when it comes to his father. He gets sentimental. A pause. No, the pool house, for now. We'll move him out there first, get him used to the idea that the main house isn't his space anymore. Easier than doing it all at once. Then the facility. I didn't hear the rest. My own heartbeat had gotten too loud. I walked back down the hallway, slower than I'd come, and let myself out the side door into the garden. I sat down on the stone bench I'd laid myself, under the maple Margaret and I had planted the year Daniel was born, and I made myself breathe. Here's the thing I want you to understand, because it's the whole heart of this story. In that moment, I was not thinking about revenge. I was thinking about my wife. Margaret had warned me. In her last months, when the illness had taken her body but left her mind sharp as a chisel, she'd held my hand one night and said something I'd tried very hard to forget. Walter, she'd said, when I'm gone, watch Daniel. Not because he's bad, because he's weak, and that woman is not. Weakness plus the wrong influence, that's how good people do terrible things. She squeezed my hand. Promise me you'll protect what we built, even from him, especially from him, if it comes to that. I'd told her she was being dramatic. I'd told her Daniel would never. Sitting on that stone bench, listening to the wind move through the maple, I finally understood that my wife had seen the ending before the story had even begun. She hadn't just warned me. As I would soon discover, she had done something about it, quietly, 3 years ago, in an office downtown, with a lawyer I'd almost forgotten existed. But I didn't know that yet. Sitting in that garden, all I knew was that my son and his wife were planning to declare me incompetent, put me in a facility, and take the house I'd built out from under me. So I did the only thing a man in my position could do. I decided to let them think they were winning. I decided to become exactly the frail, harmless old man they needed me to be, and to watch and to wait until they showed me every single card in their hand. That evening at dinner, when Vanessa mentioned, oh so gently, that the pool house had been freshly cleaned, and wouldn't I be so much more comfortable and independent out there, Walter? I set down my fork, let my hand tremble just slightly, and I smiled at her. That's very thoughtful, I said. I think I would. Her eyes flicked to Daniel's across the table, and in that one small, satisfied glance between them, I saw everything I needed to see. They thought the trap had just closed on me. They had no idea they'd just stepped into mine. I moved into the pool house the next weekend. It was maybe 400 square feet. 1 room, a small bathroom, a kitchenette I'd installed myself years ago for guests who never really came. Daniel carried a couple of my boxes out, avoiding my eyes the whole time, muttering about how it would just be temporary, how it was really about giving everyone their space. I let him talk. I played my part. I moved slowly. I let my shoulders slump. When Vanessa generously offered to handle my mail, so I wouldn't be bothered with the bills, I thanked her. That last one told me the clock had started. People who are planning to take your assets always start with your mail. They want to intercept anything from a bank, a lawyer, a county office. They want to control what you see. Which was fine, because the things I needed to see, I wasn't going to find in the mailbox. That first night in the pool house, once the lights in the main house had gone dark, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled out my phone, and I made a call I hadn't made in 3 years, to a man named Arthur Bennett. Arthur wasn't some storefront lawyer. He was the estate and property attorney Margaret had insisted we hire when Hayes Custom Homes started making real money. A careful, unhurried man who'd handled the legal bones of everything we owned. He'd drawn up our wills. He'd structured the company. And 3 years ago, though I'd nearly forgotten the details, he and Margaret had spent a great deal of time together in his downtown office, while I was busy finishing the very house I was now exiled behind. The phone rang twice. "Walter Hayes," Arthur said, and I could hear the warmth in it. "I was starting to wonder if you'd ever call. How are you holding up, old friend?" "Arthur," I said quietly, "I need you to pull our file, Margaret's and mine. My son and his wife are planning to have me declared incompetent and take the house. I heard her say it herself. They've already moved me into the pool house. The facility's next." There was a pause on the other end. Not a surprised pause. A grim, knowing one. "Walter," Arthur said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Have you signed anything? Any document at all that they've put in front of you? Power of attorney, a deed, anything?" "Nothing," I said. "Not a thing." I heard him exhale. "Good. That's very good." The sound of a keyboard, a drawer opening. "Then let me tell you something Margaret made me promise I'd only say if this exact day ever came." He paused. "She saw this coming, Walter. 3 years ago. She sat in that chair across from my desk and she told me, almost word for word, that one day Daniel's wife would try to take the house, and she made me help her make certain that they never, ever could." I gripped the phone. "What do you mean?" "I mean the deed to that estate does not work the way your daughter-in-law thinks it works," Arthur said. "I mean you don't just own that house, Walter. You own it inside a structure Margaret and I built specifically to make it untouchable. And there is one more thing on that property, one thing your son and his wife know absolutely nothing about. That is going to make everything they're planning fall apart the moment they try it." I sat in the dark of that little pool house, the house I'd built glowing warm and golden through the window across the pool, full of people who thought they'd already won. "Tell me everything," I said, and Arthur did. What Arthur told me that night changed everything. But to understand it, you have to understand what Margaret quietly did 3 years ago, while I was busy hanging the last doors on the house that would become the center of this whole war. Margaret came from money. Not the loud kind, the old, quiet kind. Her family had owned land in this county for 4 generations, and when her parents passed, she inherited a good deal of it, along with something she cared about far more than the money, a sense that land was a trust, not a trophy. She used to say the earth outlives all of us, and the least we can do is not ruin it for the ones who come after. 3 years ago, when her health first began to slip and her mind turned toward what she'd leave behind, she made 2 decisions that she kept almost entirely to herself. The first was about the deed. Margaret didn't want the estate held in a simple, name-on-paper way, the kind that can be signed over with a shaky hand and a notary who doesn't ask questions. So she and Arthur placed the entire property, all 4 acres, the main house, everything, into an irrevocable trust. I was the sole beneficiary and the sole trustee during my lifetime. In plain English, I had full use and control of everything, but the property itself couldn't be sold, transferred, mortgaged, or signed away by anyone, not even by me under pressure, and certainly not by anyone holding a power of attorney. A power of attorney only lets you act on behalf of a person. It gives you no authority over a trust that person doesn't personally own outright. Vanessa's entire plan, get me declared incompetent, seize power of attorney, transfer the deed, was aimed at a lock that simply had no keyhole. "They can declare you incompetent till they're blue in the face," Arthur said. "It won't matter. The house isn't yours to take, because it isn't yours to give. It belongs to the trust, and the trust has instructions that can't be rewritten." I felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched since the sunroom, but Arthur wasn't finished. "That's the shield, Walter," he said. "Now let me tell you about the sword." The second thing Margaret did 3 years ago was quieter still, and I hadn't known about it at all. Our 4 acres bordered a protected creek, part of a watershed the county had been fighting for years to preserve from development. Margaret, who'd watched bulldozers eat the countryside of her childhood one subdivision at a time, went to the county land trust and did something permanent. She placed a conservation easement on a significant portion of the property. A conservation easement is a legal restriction that runs with the land forever. It permanently strips away the right to subdivide, commercially develop, or in most cases heavily leverage the property. It's recorded against the deed itself, so it binds every future owner, no matter who they are. Margaret had done it to protect the creek and the old-growth trees along it. But in doing so, she'd unknowingly built a second trap, because land under a conservation easement is very nearly impossible to use as collateral for the kind of big commercial loan a greedy person might dream of taking against an $8 million estate. "So here's where you stand," Arthur said. "The house can't be taken from you because of the trust, and the land can't be milked for cash because of the easement. Margaret didn't just protect you, Walter. She built a cage around this property so beautiful and so airtight that anyone who reaches into it to steal reaches in and can't get their hand back out." I sat there a long time after we hung up, looking at the golden windows of my house across the black water of the pool. Somewhere in there, my son and his wife were sleeping soundly, certain they had cornered a frail, forgetful old man. They had no idea they were the ones already caught. All I had to do was let them keep reaching, and I knew from the way Vanessa had been circling the mailbox and the calendar that they were about to reach much, much deeper. The move came faster than I expected. Greed doesn't like to wait. 10 days after I settled into the pool house, Vanessa knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. The first time she'd voluntarily come out there at all. She was holding a tray with coffee and a pastry, wearing a soft, concerned expression I'd never once seen on her face before. Behind that expression, I could see the machinery turning. "Walter," she said gently, sitting down across from me like we were old friends. "Daniel and I have been so worried about you, out here all alone. What if you fell? What if something happened in the night and we didn't hear?" She reached over and patted my hand. "We found a wonderful place, really lovely. Green meadows. They have gardens, activities, people your own age, and full-time care, so you'd never have to worry about anything again." I let my hand tremble under hers. "A home," I said quietly, letting my voice waver. "You want to put me in a home." "A community," she corrected sweetly, "and to make everything simple, so you don't have to stress about bills and paperwork and all of that. Daniel and I would just take over managing things for you. The house, the finances, everything. You could finally just rest." She slid a folder onto the table between us. "There's just a few papers, nothing complicated. It gives us the ability to handle everything on your behalf. Power of attorney, the deed transfer, just formalities, really." There it was, on the table, in writing. I opened the folder with shaking hands and looked down at a quitclaim deed and a durable power of attorney, tabbed with little red arrows where my signature would go. Signing them would hand Vanessa exactly what she believed she needed, and would hand me, if I'd been the man she thought I was, a one-way trip to a facility and a lifetime watching strangers live in the house I built. I already knew, thanks to Arthur, that these papers were worth less than the folder they came in. The trust made the deed transfer legally impossible. The easement made the property nearly worthless as collateral. Every word on those pages was aimed at a lock with no keyhole. But I didn't tell her that, because Arthur had been very clear with me. "Walter," he'd said, "if you refuse now, if you show them any spine at all, they'll simply change tactics. They'll get more careful, more patient, maybe find some slicker lawyer. The only way to end this permanently is to let them commit fully, to let them cross a line they can't walk back. Don't stop them. Let them build the whole house of cards. Then we knock it down all at once, in a way they can never rebuild." So I looked up at Vanessa with wet, frightened eyes, and I gave her the performance of my life. I need to think," I stammered. "It's a lot. This was my home. Margaret and I let my voice break. Can I have a little time, just to make my peace with it?" Vanessa's expression flickered, impatience quickly masked. "Of course," she said, standing, gathering the folder. "Take a few days, but Walter—" She paused at the door, and the softness slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath. "Don't take too long. These decisions are so much harder when they're made for you." A threat, wrapped in silk. If I didn't sign willingly, she'd find a way to have me declared incompetent and sign for me. I nodded meekly and watched her walk back across the pool deck toward the house, her step light, certain she'd nearly won. The moment her door closed, I picked up my phone and texted Arthur 2 words. "It's time," because I'd decided something, sitting there with those worthless papers in my trembling hands. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to let Vanessa and Daniel take their scheme all the way to its end, all the way to a crime they couldn't undo. And I was going to be standing there, with Arthur beside me, when the whole thing came down on their heads. I just needed to give them a little rope, and I knew exactly what rope to give. The rope I gave them was a lie about money. That evening, I asked Daniel to come out to the pool house. "Just to talk, son, man to man." He came, reluctant, checking his watch, already braced for an argument. Instead, I poured him a drink, sat him down, and let my shoulders sag like a defeated man finally giving in. "You and Vanessa are right," I told him. "I can't keep this place up. It's too much. I've been fighting it because of your mother, but it's time." I looked at my hands. "I'll sign whatever you need, but there's something you should know first, something your mother set up before she passed." Daniel leaned in. I had his attention now, or rather, I had the attention of the man his greed had made him. "Your mother came from money, you know that. Before she died, she moved a lot of it, cash, investments, into a private account, separate from everything, a safety net." I lowered my voice like I was sharing a secret. "There's a good deal in it, and the way she set it up, it comes to you. But only through me, and only once the house situation is settled. That was her condition. She wanted to make sure the house was handled properly first." I shrugged wearily. Her words, not mine. I watched it land. I watched the arithmetic light up behind my son's eyes, the same look I'd seen on Vanessa's face in the sunroom. A hidden fortune, a locked door, and a frail old father who was finally ready to hand over the key. It was bait, of course. There was no secret cash account waiting to be unlocked by signing the deed. But I needed them to believe that speed was everything, that the faster they seized control of the property, the faster they'd reach a much bigger prize. I needed to turn their patient scheme into a reckless sprint. Because reckless people don't check with lawyers. Reckless people cut corners. And reckless people commit crimes that careful people never would. Daniel practically ran back to the house. Through the pool house window, I watched the lights come on in the main living room and stay on late into the night. 2 silhouettes moving, talking, gesturing, planning. The next morning, Vanessa was different. Brisk, energized, done with the sweet old Walter act. The pretense of taking your time evaporated. Suddenly there were phone calls, appointments, a sense of a countdown. And 2 days later, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the drive, and a nervous man in a cheap gray suit got out carrying a briefcase. I knew a notary when I saw one. I watched from behind my curtain as Vanessa met him at the door with a bright smile and led him inside. And I did something I probably should have told you about sooner. Weeks earlier, the very day after I overheard that phone call in the sunroom, I'd driven to an electronics store 2 towns over and bought a set of small, discreet security cameras, the kind people use for nannies and front porches. I'd installed them myself, quietly, in the main house, one in the living room, one in the study, one angled at the dining table. Not because I was certain I'd need them, because 40 years of building things had taught me one iron law. You never start demolition without documenting the structure first. Those cameras fed to a small drive I kept hidden in the pool house, and that afternoon, sitting on my narrow bed with a laptop on my knees, I watched, in crisp, silent high definition, my son, my daughter-in-law, and a bought and paid for notary sit down at the dining table Margaret had picked out and begin to build the crime that would destroy them. I couldn't hear them at first. Then I turned up the audio, and what I heard Vanessa say next was so much worse than I'd imagined that even I, a man who thought he'd prepared for everything, had to set the laptop down and take a long breath before I could keep watching. The audio came through thin but clear, picked up by the little camera above the sideboard. The notary was nervous, shuffling papers, and I could see why. Because what Daniel slid across the table to him wasn't the quitclaim deed I'd been shown. It was something else. Vanessa had realized, somewhere in the last 2 days, that a simple deed transfer wouldn't be enough, that she needed real, sweeping legal authority to move fast. So they'd found an old document and decided to make it into something it was never meant to be. 2 years back, before Margaret passed, I'd had a minor heart scare, a stent, an overnight in the hospital, nothing serious. The hospital had required me to name someone for medical decisions in case I went under. I'd named Daniel. It was a limited medical power of attorney, good for that procedure, expired within 30 days. I'd forgotten it existed. But Vanessa hadn't. She'd found it while handling my mail, and now it was lying on the dining table, and she was pointing at it with one manicured finger. "You take this," she told the notary, her voice low and businesslike, "and you make it current. You change medical to general and durable. You strike the expiration. You add full authority over real property and finances." She tapped the paper. "It already has his real signature on it. That's the beautiful part. It's real. We just broaden it." The notary swallowed. "Ma'am, that's altering an executed legal instrument is forgery. That's a felony. If a bank or a court ever looked closely—" "No one's going to look closely," Vanessa said. Then she reached into her bag and set a thick envelope on the table. "There's 10,000 there. There's another 10 when it's done." She smiled. "No one questions an old man who can't find his own glasses." And Daniel, my son, the boy who used to hand me nails on a job site. Daniel picked up a pen and, for 20 minutes, sat at his dead mother's dining table practicing forging his own father's signature onto a fraudulent power of attorney. I watched him do it. I watched him laugh softly when he finally got the slant right. The notary pressed his seal into the paper, and just like that, the 3 of them manufactured a federal crime in my dining room, on my camera, in my house. I want to tell you I felt only cold triumph in that moment. I didn't. I sat in that little pool house and I grieved, quietly, fully, for the son I'd clearly lost a long time before that afternoon. Whatever I did next, I understood now. I wasn't losing Daniel. Daniel was already gone. I was only responding to it. But I let them finish, because a half-built crime is deniable. A completed one is not. They weren't done, either. Once the forged document was sealed, Vanessa laid out the rest, pacing, gesturing, drunk on how easy it had been. They weren't going to a normal bank. Banks ask questions, take weeks. They'd already lined up a private, hard money lender, the kind that wires cash fast against valuable property and doesn't dig too deep. Using the forged power of attorney, they'd pledge the entire estate as collateral and pull out a massive loan. $5 million, she said. They'd take the cash, fund the lifestyle, and when the payments defaulted, let the lender seize the house. By then, they'd be long gone with the money, and I'd be in a facility, unable to stop any of it. She had it all planned. She'd thought of everything. Everything except 2 documents she didn't know existed. The trust that made the deed impossible to pledge, and the easement that made the land nearly worthless as collateral. She was about to borrow $5 million against a house that legally could not be borrowed against, and forge a federal document to do it. I picked up my phone and called Arthur. "They've done it," I said. "Forgery on video, and they're about to take a loan against the property." There was a long silence. Then Arthur said very quietly, "Then don't stop them, Walter. Let the money move. The moment that loan funds, they haven't just planned a crime. They've completed one, across state lines, with a forged federal instrument, against a property they had no right to touch." I could hear the cold edge in his voice. Let them spend it. Let them build their whole kingdom on it. And then we bring the sheriff, the lender, and the truth to their door all at once. I looked across the pool at the golden windows of my house, where my son was kissing his wife over a forged page. "Set it up," I said. "I want to be there when it falls." The loan funded 4 days later. I know the exact moment, because Arthur's monitoring flagged it, and because, that same afternoon, the mood in the main house changed like a pressure front rolling in. Through the cameras, I watched Vanessa shriek with joy and throw her arms around Daniel's neck. $5 million had landed in an account they controlled, wired by a hard money lender who'd looked at a pristine $8 million estate, seen easy collateral, and never dug deep enough to find the trust or the easement buried in the title. Greed had matched greed. The lender was reckless too. And then my son and his wife did exactly what I knew they'd do. They spent. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched, through the cameras and through the humiliating theater of their social media, 2 people set fire to their own lives and call it success. Vanessa bought a car that cost more than the first house I ever built. Daniel came home with watches, with tailored suits, with the glazed, giddy look of a man who believes he's finally arrived. They booked a trip. They talked, on camera, at that same dining table about launching Vanessa's brand, about the life they deserved, about how easy it had all been. They toasted more than once to being free of dead weight. I was the dead weight. They said it in the house I built, over the table my wife chose, and they laughed. I didn't laugh, but I didn't grieve anymore either. Somewhere in those 3 weeks, the grief finished burning, and what it left behind was clean and quiet and certain. They had taken every foot of rope I'd handed them and tied it, lovingly, into a noose. And then, right on schedule, they reached for the last thing, the house itself, because $5 million doesn't last forever when you spend it like proof of a point. As the account drained, Vanessa's plans turned toward the property. If they were going to be leveraged to the hilt, she reasoned, they might as well develop the land, subdivide the 4 acres, sell off lots, build. She'd apparently found investors. And so, on a cold, bright morning near the end of that 3rd week, I sat on the little porch of the pool house with a cup of black coffee and waited, because Arthur had told me they'd pulled county filing requests on the property, and I knew what that meant. They were coming to break ground on land they didn't own, couldn't develop, and had already borrowed against by fraud. Around 10, the cars came up the drive. Daniel's, then Vanessa's, then 2 more carrying men in wool overcoats with leather portfolios, the investors. And behind them, incongruous and loud against the quiet of Margaret's garden, a flatbed truck carrying a small excavator, and a surveyor's van. Vanessa got out first, unrolling a set of blueprints across the hood of her new car, gesturing toward the creek, toward the exact stretch of protected watershed Margaret had placed under easement to save it forever. She was explaining to the nodding investors where the first lots would go. Daniel stood beside her, arms crossed, playing the developer, the visionary, the man who'd made it. Neither of them noticed me at first, sitting quietly on the pool house porch in my flannel shirt with my coffee. Then Vanessa turned, pointing toward the pool house, telling the surveyor, I'd learn later, that the old structure in back could come down first. And her arm froze in the air. She was looking straight at me, at the man she believed was sedated and forgotten in a facility past the county line. The blueprints slipped from the car hood. Daniel followed her stare, and the color drained out of his face until he looked like a man seeing a ghost rise up out of the ground he was about to dig. I set my coffee down on the porch rail, and I stood. "Good morning," I said. "Come to see the house I built?" For a moment, nobody moved. The excavator idled. The investors looked from me to Daniel, sensing something had gone very wrong. Then Vanessa recovered, the way people like her always do, by attacking. She snatched the fallen blueprints off the gravel and marched toward me, heels stabbing the ground. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "You're supposed to be—" She caught herself in front of the investors and pivoted, raising her voice, performing. "This man is my father-in-law. He's not well. He has dementia. He shouldn't be here." She turned to the men in overcoats, waving a hand at me like I was a problem to be managed. "I have power of attorney over his affairs, legal authority over this entire property. Don't let him disturb the walkthrough." I didn't raise my voice. I've never had to. "That's a lot of authority," I said, "for a piece of paper you forged at my dining room table." Her face flickered, just for an instant, before the mask clamped back down. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will," I said. And behind me, the pool house door opened, and Arthur Bennett stepped out onto the porch in a charcoal suit, briefcase in hand. Behind him came a second man in a sheriff's uniform, a badge catching the cold light, and two deputies. Vanessa went still. Daniel made a small sound, like the air had been let out of him. Arthur descended the steps unhurried and stopped a few feet from them. "I'm Arthur Bennett, legal counsel to Mr. Walter Hayes, the sole trustee and beneficiary of the trust that owns this property." He let that word, trust, sit in the air. "I'll keep this simple, for the benefit of your investors, who I suspect would like to leave. 1. This estate is held in an irrevocable trust. It cannot be sold, transferred, or pledged as collateral by anyone, including under any power of attorney. The loan you took out against it 3 weeks ago was secured by property you had no legal right to encumber. 2. A significant portion of this land is under a permanent conservation easement, recorded against the title. It cannot be subdivided or developed. The lots you've been selling to these gentlemen do not legally exist and never will. 3. Arthur opened his briefcase and drew out a bound folder. "The power of attorney you've been waving around is a forgery. We have high-definition video and audio of you, your husband, and a notary altering an expired medical directive into a fraudulent, durable power of attorney, and of you paying that notary $10,000 in cash to do it. That is forgery, wire fraud, and identity theft, federal offenses, all completed the moment that $5 million crossed state lines." The investors were already backing toward their cars. One was on his phone. The surveyor was quietly loading his equipment. The excavator's engine cut off, and the sudden silence made everything Arthur said ring louder. The sheriff stepped forward then, past Daniel and Vanessa, and I thought for a moment he was going to cuff them right there. Instead, he walked to the cheap gray car parked at the back of the convoy, where the notary, who'd been foolish enough to come along for his second envelope, was trying to slip away into the trees. "Not another step," the sheriff said, and the sound of handcuffs closing carried clear across Margaret's garden. That was when Daniel's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the gravel of the driveway I'd poured myself, and he began quietly to fall apart. But Vanessa wasn't done. Cornered animals never are. She spun to me, and there was no more performance left, just raw fury. "It doesn't matter," she spat. "It doesn't matter what's in some trust. We owe that lender $5 million. There's a lien on this land right now. If you push this, they foreclose, and you lose everything anyway. Either way, old man, you lose." I looked at her for a long moment, and then, for the first time that morning, I let myself smile. "No," I said gently. "You borrowed $5 million against a house you don't own, using a signature you forged, secured by land that can't legally be developed or pledged. The house was never at risk, Vanessa. It couldn't be. The only names on that fraudulent loan are yours and my son's." Her face began, slowly, to change. "That debt was never mine," I said. "It was always only yours." I watched the truth arrive on Vanessa's face in stages, the way a crack spreads across a pane of glass. Because Arthur explained it to her then, precise and merciless, the way he'd once explained it to me. The trust had protected the house from the very beginning. It could never have been foreclosed on, because it was never valid collateral. The conservation easement had made the land nearly worthless for the kind of development she'd promised her investors. And the loan itself, that $5 million, had been obtained through a forged federal document that she and Daniel had personally signed. The lender, discovering the fraud, wouldn't be foreclosing on my house. They'd be coming after the two people who'd defrauded them, coming after every real asset Daniel and Vanessa actually owned. The new car, the watches, their bank accounts, everything the $5 million had bought, and everything they'd had before it. "You didn't take a loan against his estate," Arthur said quietly. "You took a personal loan through fraud that you now owe in full and cannot repay. The acceleration clause has already triggered. They want all $5 million back immediately, plus penalties. And since the collateral was never real, they're coming for you." Vanessa turned to Daniel, still sitting in the gravel, and something in her broke completely. "You said it would work," she screamed at him. "You said he was harmless. You said—" She didn't finish. She just looked, for the first time, like she understood exactly what she'd chained herself to. A bankrupt man, a federal indictment, and a marriage built on a crime. The deputies moved in. There were rights read, and cuffs, and Vanessa's voice rising and cracking as she was walked to a patrol car, still insisting all the way that this was someone else's fault. Daniel didn't resist. He just knelt there in the driveway I'd poured, in his expensive torn clothes, and when they finally lifted him to his feet, he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "Dad," he whispered, "please, I'll lose everything. I'll go to prison. Please, help me. And here's the hardest thing I'll tell you in this whole story. I wanted to. God help me. Some old, buried part of me, the part that taught him to swing a hammer, that stayed up with him over math homework, that worked double shifts so he could wear clean clothes to an office. That part of me wanted to reach out and pull my boy up out of the ruin, the way I'd pulled him up 1,000 times when he was small. But I thought of Margaret. I thought of her hand in mine, and her voice. If you shield him from every consequence, you don't save him. You only teach him he can do it again. So I crouched down, slowly, until I was level with my son's eyes. I built this house so you'd always have a foundation under you, Daniel, I said. And you tried to sell it out from under a dying woman's memory to buy watches. You didn't lose everything because of me. You lost it the moment you decided a man who mistook my silence for weakness could take whatever he wanted. I put my hand, just once, on his shoulder. I hope you build something real out of what's left. I truly do. "But I won't be building it for you." Then I stood, and I let them take him. The months after that morning cleared away like debris after a storm. The forgery, captured in high definition, left nothing for a defense attorney to build on. The notary took a plea and named names. Vanessa and Daniel were both charged: wire fraud, forgery, identity theft. Vanessa, who had spent her whole life performing wealth, spent the aftermath in a rented room with an ankle monitor, abandoned by every glittering friend the moment the money vanished. Their marriage did not survive it. She filed for divorce before the case even reached trial, unwilling to be shackled to a bankrupt man she could no longer use. The hard money lender came for everything. The new car was repossessed in the night. The watches, the accounts, the last scraps of the life they'd set fire to. All of it gone to cover a debt that could never be repaid. Daniel, stripped of the title and the suits and the illusion, ended up in a cramped apartment on the far edge of the city, working a job that paid by the hour. Some nights I imagine him lying awake in that thin-walled place, doing the math on everything he traded away, and I won't pretend the thought gives me joy. It doesn't. A father doesn't celebrate the ruin of his son. He only sometimes has to allow it. As for me, I moved back into the house I built, out of the pool house, back through the front door, into the rooms my wife had chosen the colors for. I hung our photographs back on the staircase wall, 40 years of us, right where Vanessa had stripped them away. I put the leather chairs back too. I'd never actually let her throw them out. I'd had them moved to storage the day after she set them on the curb. A man who builds things learns to save what matters before someone else decides it's trash. But I didn't let that big house sit as a monument to a war. Margaret never believed wealth was something you hoarded behind good bones. So I took a portion of what she'd left, the real safety net, the one that had nothing to do with any fake account I dangled in front of my son, and I did something with the land she fought so hard to protect. I opened the property, a few days a week, to a program for kids aging out of foster care. Young people the world had already decided to underestimate. We teach them to build, to frame a wall, hang a door, pour a foundation, read the grain of a board, to make something with their own two hands that no one can ever take from them, because they'll always know exactly how it was put together. Sometimes, in the evening, when the last of them has gone home and the tools are back on their pegs, I sit on the porch with a cup of black coffee and look out over the creek Margaret saved, going gold in the last light. And I talk to her. I tell her the house is safe, the land is safe. Everything she built to protect is still standing. I don't know if I did the right thing with our son. I'll wonder about that until the day I follow her. But I know I did the thing she asked me to do. I protected what we built, even from the person we loved most. And I know this too, the way I know the load-bearing wall of any house I ever raised. People will look at a quiet man, a man in a flannel shirt with grease under his nails, a man who doesn't shout or boast or fight, and they will decide he is weak. They will mistake his silence for surrender, his patience for defeat, and they will reach greedily into a life they think they can take. Let them. A quiet man isn't a weak man. He's just a man who knows exactly where every wall stands, and which one, when the time is right, to pull. My name is Walter Hayes. I built houses with these hands for 40 years. And the last thing I ever built was the trap that saved my wife's legacy from the people who thought I was too old, too tired, and too quiet to stop them. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best, if someone ever mistook your silence for weakness, tell me your story in the comments below. I read everyone. And if you believe that a quiet man always gets the last word, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves.